ladies and gentlemen. It'd be very hard to find anybody here in this hall this evening who hasn't seen a building fall down. Most of you would have seen the World Trade Center in New York fall down. And you know, when you put a bomb under them, they normally fall down. The building I'm going to talk about tonight, if it failed, if there was a bomb put under it, it wouldn't fall down. It would actually spring into the air and it would land on Government House. Now, you might say that's an extravagant claim for a building, and why would any building do that? I just take your mind back to being a child. Imagine you've got a jack-in-the-box. You know what they're like? They're a square box, and when you lift off the lid, Jack jumps out. He jumps out because he's sitting on a spring, and the spring is compressed when the box is closed. Open the lid, and up she goes. That's what the Olympic swimming pool was like. The Olympic swimming pool was a building which I'll explain in a minute why it springs up in the air and lands on Government House. Before I do so, I'll tell you its origins. In 1952, there was a competition to build an Olympic pool for the 1956 Games. And being as old as I am, there probably aren't many people here that remember much about 1950. But 1950 was a short time after the Second World War. There was a great shortage of materials, and there was a great sort of feeling in Melbourne that we shouldn't have the Olympic Games because there's a very lack of infrastructure in the outer suburbs. Houses were being built without sewerage systems and without roads being made. And the Labor government under John Cain in 1950 was very apprehensive about having the Games. So what the competition was about, the Olympic pool, was how to build it cheaply. That was the essence of it. The form was given. It was 2 pools, a diving pool and a swimming pool, and 5,000 seats were to rise up on both sides of the swimming pool. And the conventional way of building a building like this would be to, as the seats rise up, as you'd be aware in any sort of stadium, you have columns underneath them, and then probably a springing arch across the top to span. If the essence of our competition was to make it cheap, we tried to work out a way in which we could reduce the amount of steel or amount of material to be used in the building. What had happened is in my final year at the Melbourne University, I studied under an engineer called Norman Musson. Norman Musson introduced me to the first time about post-tension concrete and pre-stressed concrete. It was a system whereby you induce a force into a structure in the opposite direction to where the loads come onto it. Now, well, that sounds very difficult, but I'll try to explain it in the most simplest terms. If you hold up a ruler and support it with your hands, and if someone comes and puts a brick on the middle of it, you expect the ruler, the wooden ruler, to sag in the middle. But if you actually, with your hands, push the wooden ruler up so it forms up like a bow, and then someone puts a brick on it, it comes back flat. That's inducing a force into a structure to counterbalance the forces that finally come onto it. And that's what we did with the Olympic pool. We used, for the first time in the world, high tensile steel, post-tensioned. And it was a building which the only reason why we managed to win the competition was because one of the judges was Professor Francis, who was Professor of Engineering at Melbourne University, and he was able to show that our calculations reducing the tonnage of steel by 35% actually could be done. The problem was nobody was prepared to give it a building permit. Nobody wanted to undertake this building. And eventually the only way we got a building permit was to actually send it to CSIRO in New South Wales, where they experimented with the whole thing. And finally, we got a building permit. Now, when it came to the construction, I haven't been pushing slides, have I? That's something I forgot about. This is Kevin Boland, Bill Owen, and myself, opposite a model. And this is starting the construction. These are the trusses. Now this shot. The seats you can see in the background there are rising up. And we had to lift these trusses with a crane up in position. And we had to connect that truss to the seating things. The seats tend to fall down, and therefore they're pulling on the truss, and that's the induced force that we put into it. But as well as that, cables go down to the ground to a jacking device which pulls the seats down further to the ground. This is where the springing basis comes in, because if those springs are let go, the whole thing rises up, floats away. The big problem was how to connect this truss to those beams in midair. And we did that with a steel pin. Steel pin was about, well, in those days we used to speak in old-fashioned language, about 4 inches diameter. And what I used to do every night was take that pin home, put it in the refrigerator, and bring it back the next morning early to just try to reduce the diameter so it might just slide in. Because there we were up in the middle of the air, just trying to put the pin that connected the truss to the girder. The building had its problems. And the major problem was the fact that the government didn't want to pay for it. You can understand that. We knew that the pool in itself would never be self-supporting. Swimming pools aren't. They're the sort of things that lose money. And we went to John Cain and we said to him, this building will be a white elephant because it will not be able to be supported financially. And we said, what we need to do with this pool is to have a floating floor. We need to actually have it so that when it's not being used as a pool, because it could be used as a stadium, press a button and the floor comes up. He wouldn't let us do that because of money. And for that reason, the pools had a very unfortunate sort of life, because eventually the Olympic Park trustees couldn't afford to keep running it as a pool, and it had a history of being converted to a concert hall, which it wasn't suited for. And finally now, as we know, it's occupied by the very unpopular Collingwood Football Club. One of the things that made me quite famous about this pool is the pool leaked. It didn't just leak a little bit, it leaked in gushing things of water going into the Yarra. And the reason, I woke up one morning to find it was leaking, and what had happened is one of the major pipes running back to the plant we'd put it on fill and it cracked its back, so the whole pool actually emptied into the River Yarra. But that made me very famous. I got a lot of work out of that because everybody else's pool leaked and I used to get brought in to see how to fix them. One of the fascinating things about the Olympic Games was that when we built the pool and it was all ready to go for the Olympic Games, we were required by the Olympic Committee to certify that the pool was in fact 50 metres long. This was a very important thing to the Olympic Committee. So he said to them, well, at what time of the day do you want it to be 50 metres long? And they said, what do you mean? We want it 50 metres long. Stay 50 metres long. So we had to point out to them that a concrete pool moves with the temperature. The length of the pool at night time is quite different to what it is in the middle of the day. They said, we don't want to hear about that. We want a 50-metre pool. The famous Murray Rose won a race here in a special Olympic time, and I think he went up and down the pool something like about 30 times. If you actually get the survey about that pool and its change in temperature, I really think that there's no place in the world where you can have a constant championship time, because pools vary in their length all the time. So the way we overcame the situation was simply say, well, yes, it is 50 metres long, and we gave them the time when it was 50 metres long, and we said that's when you better run your race. That's something that's never been published. One of our problems, of course, was acoustics. We had a pool which was water reflecting, we had concrete seats, and at either end of the building, as you can see here, was glass. That's Arthur Boyd's sculpture. and there's the glass. So that the problem with acoustics was a great difficult thing. The only thing we could do was to introduce into the roof a series of acoustic material that absorbed the sounds and try to reduce the reverberation time. At the opening, it was decided that the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra would be put on a raft in the middle of the pool. Yes, in the middle of the pool, 5,000 people sitting on either side, and they would play Handel's water music. Well, we had our fingers crossed. Instructions were given for everyone was to try to wear an overcoat because that would help absorb the sound. It worked. It actually worked. We could hear Handel's water music. And as a result of that, during the games, they were able to make sort of announcements and so forth. So in these days, the Institute of Architects wasn't giving awards, but the building was a success. It performed for the games. It won the prize of the best building built in Australia during 1950. Well, it was built from 1952 to 1956. So we're very pleased. My favorite building is a building you'd know very well. It's Newman College, designed by Burley Griffin and his wife, Marion Marnie. So it's not very much special to nominate a building which everybody knows and which everybody wouldn't think very unusual to actually have it. But I'd like to tell you the reason why I like Burley Griffin's building and Burley Griffin's work in particular. Burley Griffin, in my opinion, was an architect that really able to control the emotions in building. In Newman College, if you go into one of the rooms that the students would occupy, it had a tremendous feeling of containment. And then the two long arms of these rooms culminate in the center of a hall, a dining hall, and it's crowned by a dome, as you can see here in this slide, a most incredible dome. Because not only was he an architect who could control emotions, and you can see the contrast of the serenity of this building with the excitement of the Capitol Theatre, but he could do it in such an imaginative way. And as an architect, that's been my aim as an architect, to try to control the emotions in building. So he's been my absolute inspiration and God, and I think he is possibly the most wonderful architect, and this happens to be the most wonderful building I've ever experienced. Thank you very much.